let's go ahead and take a look at things as they are, because the red wave that is supposed to happen every single time an election happens, it didn't happen. And whenever that happens, typically there's talk about changing the way voting happens here in the United States. So, in what ways are voting potentially going to have to change? I guess we'll have to take a look at the article here, because there are some right-wing politicians that want to push restrictions on voting. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that here in a second. But first, before we get into that, let's get into the fan art section. So first we have two from Mathematical Cabbage. Said, oh boy, we got some Homestucks. A troll version of Raz and Suris, inspired by some convos in general chat. Suris is a fuchsia sign and Raz is an indigo sign. Well, I'm still working my way through Homestuck, so the only thing I'll say about this is buckets. Anyways, the next one we have here is another one from Mathematical Cabbage. It is the follow-up to the original Piper Draws and Stuff. Jesus, thank you for the 6 community subs. For context, I made a joke about taking a nap if we hit level 5 on the hype train, and apparently I need to talk about taking naps more often. Jesus. The last one we have here is from Avenger138. This is my favorite Suris I've made on Hero Forge so far. I love how the Axe and Slime Cat turned out. Oh my god, and there's even a Blizzy! There's even a Blizzy! That is amazing. I like. As always, everybody, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop into the fan art section of the Discord. With that all said, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. And remember that we are currently sponsored by EveryPlate. They have incredibly affordable meal kits that can be delivered straight to your door for a very, very reasonable price. Usually about $1.79 per meal is what it ends up working out to after you count the discount you'll get if you go to the link in the description and use coupon code POGNECOSURUS149. That all said, and Mirlana, thank you very much for the 5 community subs. Let's get into the content at hand. After right-wing predictions of a red wave or red tsunami were defeated by voters, some right-wing leaders are predictably calling for new restrictions on early voting and mail-in ballots, both of which have increased access to the ballot and expanded safe ways for people to vote during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because some people may have forgotten, we are still in the middle of that pandemic. It hasn't magically left us. We're still dealing with it. It's probably more accurate to say that COVID is endemic to our species now, with how prolific it is. But that's how things are at the moment. Rabbit Ears Blog, thank you for the 100 bits. Among those calling for limiting early and mail-in voting is the Family Research Council's Ken Blackwell, a notorious voter suppressor during his tenure as Ohio Secretary of State, who in 2020 participated in formal Donald Trump's scheme to get Vice President Mike Pence to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power after Trump's loss. An article published today by FRC's news outlet, The Washington Stand, said Blackwell called it crazy to depend on vote by mail and said he would end early voting if he could. In a conversation with FRC's Tony Perkins 2 days after the election, Blackwell declared himself a 21st century Luddite, and he said he wanted to ditch voting machines for paper ballots and restrict voting to Election Day itself. I don't understand why people want this. I don't get it. The idea that voting should not be something that everybody participates in is silly to me. Like, by all accounts, more things that I want to happen politically would happen if I restricted Republicans from being able to vote. But at the same time, I believe in the merits of democracy. We live in a society with multiple people, so having multiple people being able to check and balance each other, that's a feature, not a bug. To try to argue that you want to restrict people's voting as much as possible, you tend to only make it to where the people who have the greatest access to transportation, the greatest access to time off at work, basically you make it to where only people who are privileged are able to vote easily and everybody else just has to struggle. Not to mention, you make voting infinitely more difficult. If you restrict voting to election day, there are people who will not want to vote because they will be stuck in a line, and that basically cuts people who are severely disabled from voting as well. If your goal is to restrict voting to the single day, then my only assumption is that your goal is to just prevent most people from being able to vote, which leads you with, again, only the more privileged individuals being able to do so, and they tend to vote more conservative than not. So that's basically what we're trying to do, at least in my estimation. Blackwell and Perkins agreed that voting by mail and longer election periods create greater ballot security challenges and more opportunities for human error. While that might be true, based on the mere basic fact of more time means more opportunities for error, more times doing the same thing means more opportunity for error, I still don't know if I 100% agree that getting rid of opportunities to vote is a good idea. I don't. I think more opportunities for more people to vote more often is a good thing. Perkins claimed, Blackwell agrees, saying that, well, what they figure is that if you have enough confusion, if you have tight margins, you get vote counts in what I call the area of litigation. In reality, election experts and studies have shown that vote by mail is safe and reliable. Yeah, it's almost like we've been doing it forever. I'm sorry, if I can do my taxes by mail, I should be able to do my votes by mail. I had an issue with TurboTax one year, and I had to actually physically mail in my taxes. If that's a thing that I magically should not be able to do, then maybe I might agree with not being able to vote by mail. But at the same time, I know that it's not a security issue one way, so it shouldn't be a security issue the other way. While making insinuations about Democratic motives, Perkins and Blackwell said that there were fewer reports of shenanigans this year, thanks in part, they said, to having additional observers at polls. Oh, okay, so this whole thing could be solved by having poll observers, as opposed to restricting the amount of people who get to physically vote at all. Cynthia Sin, thank you for the follow. Perkins said that the two political parties have worldviews that are 180 degrees apart. Yeah, that's what happens when you have that kind of divide. Cynthia Sin, thank you for the subscription. Generally speaking. Claiming that our freedoms, our abilities to raise our families, to teach our children, to love the Lord and know Him and live that faith out in broader society is at risk every election. Yeah, LGBTQ rights and rights of all minorities are at risk in every election as well. I don't see why there's a discrepancy there. Like, if you're worried about that, we're worried about minority rights, and by extension, we're also worried about rights of women and rights of pretty much anybody to secure basic shit like healthcare and food. We know the difference in our constitutional republic is that God is at the center, He is central to it, and all of the totalitarian states that I've ever visited, they tried to run God and faith out of public square, crush the family, and make people more dependent, not free citizens, but subjects. That sounds like an oversimplification. It's basically trying to say that, a welfare state is necessarily godless, when it's not. That's a giant straw man of any other type of society that is not built on the idea of self-sustenance. I'm going to say this right now. The idea that everybody should be self-sustained specifically is notoriously ableist, and I'm not saying that just to use the trigger word there. I'm saying that because I legitimately believe that to be the case. If you want a society where the only things that people can have are the things that they have earned through their blood, sweat, and tears, then the people who don't have the ability to produce that blood, sweat, and tears, the people who are disabled or are too young or are too old and enfeebled, they don't get the same benefits as everyone else. And I'm sure there's somebody who wants to say, well, they didn't earn it. Some people don't have the opportunity. Some people don't have the ability to do that. I'm of the opinion that if someone doesn't have the ability, they should still be given unto them that which they need. To each according to their needs, from each according to their ability. If your ability is nil, but your needs are high, then you should have your needs met, with the understanding that your ability is nil. I feel like that is one of the benefits of being in a society. If you want to treat all people like they are always, 100% of the time, in a bubble, on an island, then you get a very different society, or you don't, rather, you don't get a society. You don't get a society at all. That's just a bunch of libertarians playing the bail game with one another. While making insinuations about Democratic motives, Perkins and Blackwell said that there were few reports of shenanigans this year. Perkins said that the two political parties have worldviews that are 180 degrees apart. We already read that. Speaking about midterm elections, Blackwell said that we may not have a red tsunami, but there were major victories for right-wing candidates. We cannot let the devil steal our joy, he said. Perkins responded by quoting or paraphrasing Pastor Gary Hamrick, said, "Hey, we saw Roe overturn and we didn't expect some kind of backlash from the devil." What? Said, "I think the reason that people are opposed to very practical procedures, such as photo ID, is because they want to cheat the system. They want to be able to manipulate it." No. The reason we want to avoid things like forcing photo ID is most people have to pay for those. So a homeless person who has no job and has to choose every day between spending the $25 a photo ID might cost them on either that idea or on either that ID or food, is largely going to always choose to feed themselves instead. Raindog says, "Is this a Suzu model?" Yes. Yes, this is a Suzu model. Suzu does all things Slime Suris. Slime Girl Suris, Slime Suris, all the various costumes for Slime Suris. That is all Suzu Sawara. Remixin does everything 2D Suris, otherwise outside of the VKS model, which is done by Salem Sky specifically, and then all things 3D Suris are done by Bonbonberry. But we saw Roe overturn and we didn't expect some kind of backlash from the devil. I love this bringing in of the imaginary enemy all the freaking time. It's agitating, but it's also kind of funny. Look at this victory we had. It's a spiritual victory. We didn't expect our spiritual enemy to come attack us then, did we? Like, Jesus Christ. Come on, guys. It's one thing to have your deity that you worship, and I'm not going to stop you from doing that, but to constantly act like everything that happens in your life is dictated by the imaginary enemy that you have as well, no. Can you stop, please? That's what causes people to go on literal Salem witch trials. But thank you very much for redeeming your points for an owl. Blackwell then said they want confusion, they don't want clarity. No, we want clarity and confusion, but we also want to make sure that everybody is given the opportunity to vote. To be fair, Perkins and Blackwell know something about cheating the system and creating confusion. Both energetically embraced and promoted Trump's lies about the 2020 election. In December 2020, they signed a letter falsely claiming there is no doubt President Donald J. Trump is the lawful winner of the presidential election. Joe Biden is not president-elect. The letter came on state legislatures in 6 battleground states won by Biden to appoint pro-Trump electors anyway. At the end of that month, both Perkins and Blackwell signed another letter urging Senate Republicans to contest electors from 5 states. As mentioned earlier, Blackwell was also involved in the scheme to pressure Pence to overturn the election. On December 28th, 2020, Blackwell sent an email to several right-wing insiders urging that Pence and his staff get a briefing from John and Ken, that is, John Eastman and Ken Klukowski. Eastman, a lawyer who published illegal schemes to keep Trump in power, has had a long professional association with Klukowski, a former director of FRC's Center for Religious Liberty, who, after Trump's loss, was parachuted into the Justice Department's office of Jeffrey Clark, was also plotting to drag the DOJ into Trump's efforts to overturn the election. Basically, a whole bunch of people are all interwoven in this giant web of trying to keep religious nutbags in power. 2 days before the Capitol insurrection, Blackwell tweeted a video message using the Stop the Steal hashtag and urging activists to demand that members of Congress address election irregularities and illegalities on January 6th. They said this is not a time to sideline sitters or backbenchers. You must do what you can with what you have where you are. Our republic demands it. I always feel really antsy about these kinds of calls to action because some people read it as a call to go and vote harder, and some people read it as a call to go and shoot up a nightclub. Under Perkins' leadership, FRC last year launched the Center for Biblical Worldview, which said it would help activists see the spiritual war behind the political war. Pollster and Center for Biblical Worldview senior fellow George Barna told religious rights activists at FRC's Pray, Vote, Stand summit last year that it is their duty to indoctrinate other people's children into a biblical worldview. Those are words. When you say that it's your duty to indoctrinate, one, that just sounds like the code for the Marines. Two, yeah, other people's children. That's the key word there. Other people's children. It's not just indoctrinate your children, which is bad enough. Other people's children as well. You know for a fact that you stand on the side of truth and justice when you have to indoctrinate other people at a young and vulnerable age. And yet, they like to call people who are in the LGBTQ groomers. I'm just going to go and say this right now. This is kind of more and more evidence that every single time a conservative throws out an accusation, they're actually engaging in severe projection. Because this is a call to grooming. This is a call to grooming children, not in a sexual sense, but in a religious sense, in a controlling sense, in a cult-like sense. And yet, it's still a thing that they are going to call for because they're free to do so. Religious extremism is becoming more and more normalized in the States, or rather, it's been normalized for a very long time, and as a result, we've all been numb to it for ages. If some wacko is out on the side of the street with a sign saying the apocalypse is coming soon, half of us might see him as being particularly crazy. The other half of us might see him as just your regular everyday Baptist. Vibertuka says, do you think bigots will win? No, I don't. Society on the whole has a tendency to lean towards progressivism. As inconvenient of a truth as that is for a lot of Republican politicians, it is still a truth that they have to wrestle with. And it sucks to be them, too. Because as it turns out, conservatism and the idea to hold on to these old traditions and old ways of thinking for as long as possible, these ideas tend to die with the bigots who care about them. Like, give us another 50 years or so, and people calling for the return to the good old days of Jim Crow simply won't be around anymore. Conservatism always tends to lean for a society that was better roughly 50 years ago. So you usually only have about a roughly 50-year wait for certain types of bigotry to naturally ease themselves into the long, long sleep. But I know that's not super uplifting to hear, because that means that most of us will probably be dead by the time some of these ideas are rightfully in their coffin. So in the meantime, we have to do what we can to make sure that people don't fall down these terribly conservative rabbit holes. But, with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, because on my end, none of this is super surprising. We've got Republicans trying to restrict voters' rights because they didn't get their red wave. They didn't get their red tsunami. We may have lost the House to them. I'm still pissed that Marjorie Taylor Greene managed to win in my district. But we didn't lose the Senate, and that's the thing that they need desperately. They want to hold both the House and Senate. And they're just not super happy that they don't have it. So, in the comment section below, let me know what you guys think, and as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here.